Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
Beyond All Repair from WBUR and ZSP Media has been named one of the best podcasts of the year so far by Vulture, and it'll leave you questioning everything.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
And the biggest twist of all is almost here. Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you love true crime or comedy, celebrity interviews or news, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue. And guess what? Now you can call them on your auto insurance too with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. Get your quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
From the Center for Investigative Reporting and PRX, this is Reveal. I'm Al Ledson.
I'm going to turn it over to Bruce today, and maybe, Bruce, you can give us a few more words about yourself and then get started.
Sure. Asking an attorney to talk about himself, this could go on for hours.
Bruce Praet is not a household name, but maybe it should be, especially in California, where he's been one of the most influential architects of policing policies for the last 2 decades.
I was a cop for 10 years, and I've been defending him for, 34 years now in federal court.
The last time Bruce put on the badge was back in the 80s. He worked as a patrol officer, was on the K-9 unit, and spent time as a detective, all in Orange County, California. Today, one of his claims to fame is the advice he's given to police departments across the state.
Start with a suspect. Please record the suspect, and you know he's going to lie through his teeth. All the better. Paint him into a corner. Make sure he can't wiggle out later in court.
Over the years, Bruce has given a lot of talks and a lot of advice in the form of trainings, like these online webinars. Because he's an attorney, a lot of that advice is about legal issues and how to avoid them. He often talks in a tone that says, "I've been through it all before." And the situations he describes are often framed as us versus them.
How do you know if there's going to be a lawsuit? Well, when the bad guy says, "I'm going to sue your ass," it's usually a pretty good indication.
This audio is from a workshop Bruce ran in 2019 on how officers can protect themselves in court.
I don't understand why cops have this inherent need to take bloody photographs of suspects after they get in a fight or whatever with the bad guy. Stop it. Clean them up. There's a simple formula. You all need to commit this to memory. Red turns to green at the time of trial. If there's blood in the photo, you are going to pay money. Clean them up and get them smiling for the picture. We use that in court later. It is good stuff. Send me copies. I'm going to publish a book. Stupid People Hurt by Cops. We're all going to make $1 million.
Back in 2021, investigative reporter Brian Howey started watching Bruce's webinars. And in one of them, he heard Bruce give a piece of advice that stood out about what to do when an officer kills someone on the job.
What's the likelihood you're going to get sued in an officer-involved shooting? Damn close to 100%. Trust me. Somebody will crawl out from underneath a rock and decide the dearly departed is finally worth something now that he's dead. And you're going to get sued. But what do?
Today on the show, we're focusing on what Bruce advises officers to do after someone is killed by police. It's advice that some policing experts call inhumane. We teamed up with Brian and the investigative reporting program at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism for this story we first aired in 2023. Brian starts with how things should be done.
After spending a lot of time listening to Bruce's webinars, I did a lot of research on what's supposed to happen after an officer kills someone. One of those things is a death notification. Basically, notifying friends or family that someone has died. It's part of the job for many law enforcement officers. A lot of training materials on how police should do these notifications mention two things: delivering the news directly and doing so as soon as possible.
You make it fast. It's kind of like taking a Band-Aid off. You don't pull it one little piece at a time. It's got to be fast. And that's the compassionate way of telling somebody that their loved one's passed away. You don't play games with them.
I found examples like this one. Former cops giving interviews on how notifications should be done. FBI training materials say the same thing. Notifications should be done clearly and quickly. So that's the official advice. Bruce Praet's advice is different.
Here's some free advice. Get a profile on the suspect as soon as you can. In this age of social media, the grapevine has gotten lightning speed. Before the dust settles, I want you to send in a uniform, a detective, I don't care, somebody out to their friends and family to find out what they've been up to for the last 24 hours.
In Bruce's advice, the investigation is centered on the person who police killed. He's advising officers to find out as much as possible. Who was this person? What were they up to? Were they breaking any laws? In essence, get as much dirt as quickly as possible.
Go out there and get that evasive truth.
The evasive truth. Bruce teaches that the truth is harder to access after a death notification. So Bruce recommends police start with questions to get as much information before telling families why they're there. In this training, Bruce acts out both sides of the interaction to demonstrate his advice. Here, he's playing an officer, and listen for how he, as the officer, describes why he's there.
Hi, Mr. Jones. We've had contact with your son. We're trying to figure out what he's been up to.
Then, Bruce plays the part of the mother. He calls her Mrs. Jones.
Oh, you know what? He got laid off. His girlfriend broke up with him. His dog died. He's been on a drinking binge. He's been meth all week long. See that hole in the wall? He just punched his fist. What's his bail? Where do we get him? At which point, by the way, you'll get a very concerned look on your face. Say, you know what, Mrs. Jones, I regret to inform you your son was involved in a shootout with the officers and he didn't survive. What, my son, the Eagle Scout? No. Sorry, lady. You're married to that evasive concept called the truth.
Consider for a moment what Bruce is suggesting. Imagine you're home and you get a knock on the door. It's the police. You let them in and they start asking questions about a relative of yours. They ask about their drug use, criminal history, mental health. You answer the questions, but the whole time you're wondering why they're asking them. And only when you ask directly do the officers reveal that your relative is dead.
That advice that Bruce Praet is giving is, to my view, at the expense of serving the community and recognizing the harm and devastation of a police-involved killing.
UCLA law professor Joanna Schwartz has been looking into Bruce's influence on policing for years. She does research on police misconduct and accountability, and she's the author of a recently published book called Shielded: How the Police Became Untouchable.
Bruce Praet is, in the circles in which he travels, an exceedingly important figure. He is in the center, I believe, of the community of defenders of police officers in these cases, and also at the center of police policymaking.
Bruce isn't just shouting this advice from a YouTube soapbox. He co-founded a company called Lexipol.
Thousands of agencies across the country trust Lexipol.
Lexipol has been serving police departments since it was founded in the early 2000s. The company offers trainings like Bruce's webinars and policy. That's Lexipol's bread and butter. In the U.S., police departments are responsible for writing their own policy manuals, the rules for how police officers are supposed to do their jobs. Large police departments in major cities usually can afford an in-house team of policy writers who keep the manuals up to date on the latest local, state, and federal laws. But for smaller departments without all those lawyers, it can be hard to keep up. That's where Lexipol comes in. The company has a kind of policy buffet with ready-made language that police departments can put into their manuals.
And the goal of Lexipol if you look at their materials, their goal is to manage risk, they say, which really means to reduce liability.
Joanna and other critics, like the American Civil Liberties Union, say Lexipol's policies are vaguely worded, so it's hard to tell when an officer violates them. And they're cookie cutter. You can find the same language over and over in manuals from different departments. Agencies are allowed to edit the policies they get from Lexipol if they choose to, but it's unclear how many actually do. And Lexipol's reach is far and wide. How big is Lexipol?
Lexipol writes the policies for more than 95% of California's law enforcement agencies. And at last count, they provided policies for upwards of 3,500 law enforcement agencies across the country. And I am aware of no other private or government entity that comes close to writing policies for that volume of agencies.
3,500 agencies across the country. That means nearly 1/5 of all police departments in the U.S. subscribe to Lexipol.
When Lexipol provides policies and trainings, and Bruce Praet is a founder of Lexipol, and Bruce Praet gets on a webinar and gives advice about how to undertake an investigation, you have to assume that officers and their supervisors and the administrators and executives within law enforcement agencies are listening.
I wanted to see if Bruce's advice was just advice, or if police departments are actually using this tactic after they kill someone, turning death notifications into interviews, and then using the information police get to protect themselves in court. So I focused where Lexipol got its start, California. I called civil rights attorneys all over the state to ask if they'd ever heard of this. I reviewed dozens of court cases, and I filed a bunch of public records requests. And after a few months, I got some answers. Police departments have been conducting death notifications just like Bruce advises all over the state. You can hear it for yourself in these scratchy police recordings where instead of opening with what happened, police went into interrogation mode.
Does your husband own a gun?
So was he using drugs or selling drugs or?
What was your husband upset about?
Do you know if he's married, if he has a wife, kids?
These clips are some of the 20 instances I found across 15 different police agencies. In each of these interactions, officers spent those crucial first minutes with families peppering them with questions instead of telling them someone they know was killed or seriously hurt by police.
How long were you guys married?
We were married and I got a divorce 2 years ago.
What was the reason?
I just need to know what really happens. I'm trying to figure out the whole picture, so I need your honesty. Has he hit you before?
Did you hear him say anything like unusual where you think he might be having like a mental health issue? Nothing at all?
Has he ever been diagnosed with any mental issues?
No.
Did he take any medications?
No.
In 14 of those cases, the departments that used this interview tactic had been or still were Lexipol customers. And that's just what I found from the small percentage of California police departments that I requested records from. Multiple civil rights attorneys told me I've only discovered a fraction of what they say is a routine policing practice. In the incidents I found, officers continue asking questions for several minutes as confused and anxious families wait to learn why the police are at their door.
Well, it seems like I need to have a lawyer present the way you're asking those questions. I hope he's not in big trouble, and I wish you guys would get to the punchline.
Once Brian confirmed that this is happening across California, he started looking into how police departments use the information they get from families during death notifications. When we come back, Brian meets with people who have experienced this tactic firsthand.
As I look back, I sang like a canary. If you haven't really been involved with law enforcement, you think they're your friends. And so I told them more than I should have.
That's coming up next on Reveal.
At Radiolab, we love nothing more than nerding out about science, neuroscience, chemistry.
But we do also like to get into other kinds of stories. Stories about policing or
politics,
country music,
hockey,
sex, of bugs.
Regardless of whether we're looking at science or not science, we bring a rigorous curiosity to get you the answers.
And hopefully make you see the world anew.
Radiolab, adventures on the edge of what we think we know.
Wherever you get your podcasts.
From the Center for Investigative Reporting and PRX, this is Reveal. I'm Al Letson. One of the first things you'll notice about attorney Humberto Guizar's office is the Los Angeles sports memorabilia. Humberto's commitment to LA teams is even painted on his office walls.
Dodger blue, can't you tell? I'm a Dodger fan. It's Dodger blue. Yeah.
In the fall of 2023, investigative reporter Brian Howie went to his office in the sun-baked city of Montebello, just outside of Los Angeles. It's not just decorated with sports souvenirs. Humberto also has a figurine collection, a diorama of toys he bought from a gumball machine at the car wash.
It looks like you have a whole scene going on. Like, tell me the story behind this.
Well, no, I the little homies, I like them. You know, that's the environment I grew up in. So symbolic. Right here you have a car with 3 guys sitting in there like just chilling. Then you have this guy flirting with the little chola girl. This one shows a guy surrendering, right, with an LAPD officer aiming a gun at him with a dog, a canine dog, and this guy on the bike like, oh shit, I'm out of here.
But there's no figurine for Humberto. If there was, it'd be one with a stocky build, salt and pepper hair, a goatee, a few tattoos, and a few rings. And maybe there ought to be one. Because this is a familiar scene to Humberto. He spent nearly 30 years representing more than 100 families of people who died in encounters with police.
The angle for us is to get you as much compensation, and that's a vindication of the truth. When you get a big resolution and you get paid a lot of money for the loss of a loved one, that is acknowledging that they did wrong. Because they don't just pay a lot of money for nothing, right? So it does bring a sense of justice to the family.
Brian met with Humberto to ask if he'd ever heard of a policing tactic, one where officers question the next of kin before notifying them that someone they know has been killed by police.
This has been the case for many years. It's turned into a weapon to hide the truth and to get the truth modified in a way that benefits them, to justify the use of deadly force and to justify their bad behavior. Simple as that.
Why?
They use that information to minimize the value of the case, obviously.
Today, we're revisiting a story we first aired in 2023 with Brian and our partners at UC Berkeley's investigative reporting program. A story about law enforcement officers questioning families before notifying them that a relative has been killed by police. And a quick warning, this story contains audio clips of actual death notifications that could be difficult for some listeners.
Humberto is one of about a dozen attorneys I talked to for this story. Many say they've seen this tactic so often, they see it as standard practice. And many put me in touch with families who say they experienced it in real life. This led me to Tina Slater.
Okay, I had just got off work because I worked 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift at work. So I had just got home.
It's a spring morning in 2015. Tina had just wrapped up an overnight shift at Joann Fabrics and finished a meal with her brother and mom, Kathleen. Neither of them expected 2 San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies to knock on their door.
Today is Wednesday, April 15, 2015. At approximately 11:42 hours, be attempting to make family notification. It will be myself and Detective Troy Meridian.
Tina's lawyers gave me this tape the deputies recorded that day.
How you doing? Hi, we're the detectives from the Sheriff's Department. Can we come in?
Yeah, sure.
The deputies are there to tell Tina that her 28-year-old son, Joseph, has been killed.
Hi, you're Tina? Mm-hmm. Are you Joseph's mom? Yeah. Can we talk to you for a few minutes?
Inside the house, it's the 5 of them. Tina, her brother, her mom Kathleen, and the 2 sheriff's detectives. Instead of opening with the actual death notification, one detective asks a question.
So I want to talk to you about Joseph. Was Joseph here last night?
My mom, I guess, had argued with Joseph the night beforehand, so my mom started telling him stuff about how he was acting.
He was here late last night.
Yeah, I tore my things off the windows and pulled the curtains back, and I think he was on meth or something. I'm not sure, because he'd done it once before and he acted crazy, and this time he was really out of hand.
Kathleen is a little hard to hear, but she says her grandson Joseph was there the night before, that she thinks he was on meth because he was acting out of hand, and that he's done this before. The detectives keep the questions coming for nearly 10 minutes.
What time did this start? What was he doing walking up and down the street? What was he doing inside the house? You said he tore something down? You said earlier he looked like he was on methamphetamine. So a couple of years ago when he was climbing the poles and doing that stuff, he was acting the same way. He got mad. Do you know what drugs he uses, if any? What was he saying? Around what time did he leave?
All of these questions get into Joseph's past. His issues with substance abuse, mental health challenges, times where he'd been arrested before, plus more details about his behavior that night. All the while, delaying the main reason why detectives are there, to tell the family Joseph is dead. The questions stop when Kathleen asks one of her own.
Where is he at now, may I ask?
Well, there's no easy way of saying this. Unfortunately, he did pass away.
No.
I'm sorry to have to tell you.
Oh, my God. No.
I know my mom always felt guilty. She kept saying, oh God, here I went and told them all this stuff. I feel so bad. I feel so guilty. So yeah. Yeah, she had told me not that long before she passed how she would always feel guilty for that. So.
And did you, after they notified you that Joseph had died, did you have a sense as to why they were asking those questions?
At the beginning, no.
Yeah.
No, at the beginning, because I didn't realize how he had died. They had just said, that he was dead. And then I had found out later, hearing on the news and stuff, actually, what exactly, he died of. They just said that his death was being investigated.
The detectives who met with Tina and her family gave few details about what happened. Here's what they shared that day.
That's one thing we're investigating, is what caused it. He was at the Valero gas station, and he started doing some things there which caused them to call the police. And when the police got there, he was handcuffed, but then he started having some medical problems and they called an ambulance. But unfortunately, he died.
All of that is technically true, but news reports, records from the sheriff's department, and the court records paint a fuller picture. The night Joseph died, San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies arrested him at a Valero gas station. The deputies restrained Joseph using a hog tie. It's a controversial technique that involves binding someone's wrists to their ankles while that person is lying on their stomach. And it's controversial because it's known to be deadly. Deputies put Joseph in a patrol car while he was hogtied, and after a few minutes, he stopped breathing. Tina and her family sued the sheriff's department in civil court. They accused deputies of killing Joseph with excessive force. The department's lawyers argued that Joseph died from a methamphetamine overdose. That's how the coroner ruled Joseph's death. And to bolster their point, during a deposition, they played the recording from the death notification where Tina's mom shared Joseph's drug history. Just before the case went to trial, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department reached an undisclosed settlement with Tina's family. The sheriff's office never responded to my request for an interview, nor did they comment on why officers questioned Tina and her family before notifying them about Joseph's death. I asked Tina about that too. Did you think about how they asked those questions before they told you what had happened? Maybe considered why they had asked those questions? Did you have any idea?
At the beginning, no. I was in too much of a shock. But as time kind of went on, I kind of realized that, they were doing that to build their case. for their defense. You know, they don't know Joseph. They only got, you know, like the bad thing that he did yesterday. They don't hear about, you know, the person that he was, the good person. They just go by, you know, how he was acting at a certain point, not the true person that he was.
In the months after I spoke with Tina, I found more and more cases like hers. Cases where investigators extracted damning information from families before telling them that their relative had been killed by police. Many of those families and their attorneys tell me they believe the information law enforcement got from them in that moment may have impacted the outcome of their lawsuit. If there's one case that exemplifies this, it's Jim Showman's.
Jim. How was the drive?
It was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Me too. I went to meet him on a sunny day this past fall at his suburban home in San Jose, California.
We've been talking on the phone for what, like a year and a half now?
Yeah, it's been a while. There you go.
In the summer of 2014, Jim had returned from work to find his home surrounded by police cars. Officers tell him that his 19-year-old daughter Diana is in the hospital and that they need to ask him some questions. They escort him to the station and seat him in an interrogation room.
I'm seething, I'm scared, in shock, wanting just to find out what happened. How is my daughter? How is Diana?
Jim goes through the same unfortunate pattern. Detectives come in and ask him lots of questions about Diana. Jim tells them she's bipolar and how just a couple days earlier, she'd been in an argument that resulted in a 911 call.
As I look back, I sang like a canary. I guess I was just in this mindset that I guess people, if you haven't really been involved with law enforcement, you think they're your friends and you think that they are there to help you. And so I told them more than I should have. And I think soon thereafter, they stopped the questioning. And I said, what happened?
Diana was shot and killed by a San Jose police officer. According to the police report, Diana called 911 and told the operator she had a gun and was going to shoot her family. When officers arrived, Diana walked out of the house holding a cordless drill that was painted black. The whole interaction lasted 1 minute. Diana pointed the drill at police, and one of the officers shot her. The cop who pulled the trigger said she thought Diana was holding a gun. The San Jose Police Department wouldn't agree to an interview, but they did file a public report on the shooting and concluded the officer legally shot Diana in self-defense. After Diana was killed, Jim and his now ex-wife sued the department. They argued that the officer should have done more to de-escalate before shooting their daughter.
That was the only thing we could do to hit back.
But the department had been working to undermine Jim Showman's lawsuit long before he'd even considered filing one. On a scratchy phone connection, I got a hold of Wayne Smith, a retired San Jose police detective who interviewed Jim that day.
I seem to recall that we did ask him questions before we let him know that she died. And if my memory serves me, he was a bit upset about that.
Wayne is hard to hear. He's saying he remembers asking Jim questions about Diana before letting him know she died. He says, quote, "If my memory serves me, he was a bit upset about that." I ask him why he performed death notifications this way.
Inevitably what happens when the police kill somebody is the next of kin sue the police. They sue the police, they sue the city or the county. I mean, they go after them, they want money. So it's important to interview the next of kin as soon as possible to lock them into a story.
Wayne says lawsuits are common when police shoot somebody, so officers question families in order to lock them into a story. He is the only officer I've been able to get on the record acknowledging this tactic as something police do to protect their departments from lawsuits. But later in the interview, Wayne would walk back that statement. You have mentioned the lawsuit aspect a couple of times. I mean, is there an aspect to that when you're interviewing these family members where you're trying to protect the department? Or
No, not at all. Not at all. We're not concerned about civil litigation. What we're concerned about is the criminal investigation and the truth.
Jim says the city of San Jose initially offered him and his ex-wife $10,000 to settle their lawsuit. But Jim says that after reviewing the case, the city took it off the table. Both Jim and his attorney tell me they think it's partly because of what Jim said about Diana in that interrogation room. Instead of the money, the city came back to the table with two things. First, he says he and his ex-wife were invited to go through the police department's crisis intervention materials and work with officers to update them. In the city's second offer, Jim took me to visit.
And so this is what the memorial bench here is, and they did a nice job. They planted the trees so there's shade here.
What does this plaque say?
In loving memory of Diana Marie Schoeman, July 5th, 1995 to August 14th, 2014. Play ball.
The bench sits in the shade of two young trees and overlooks the third baseline. It's the position Diana played on her softball team as a kid. Jim does his best to visit at least once a year.
It's a nice gesture, but it's well below what should have been, and it's a nice acknowledgement, but it's not what I'm going to continue to fight for.
Since Diana's death, Jim's grief has fueled his advocacy work. He's met with state officials and academics to talk about how police officers should be trained when they encounter civilians in the middle of a mental health crisis. Lately, he's been working with a local advocacy group to push for a new California law that would bar officers from interviewing families before delivering a death notification.
We are working so this doesn't occur again, but I really don't have any other choice personally than to just keep pursuing justice and change of society. I mean, change of the laws. So, other families aren't victims of this.
The San Jose Police Department is one of the few in California that does not contract with Lexipol. It's the company we mentioned earlier in the show. Lexipol has contracts with more than 95% of California police departments, and they offer trainings and write policy for law enforcement agencies. And until 2022, the company's website offered a webinar that advises officers to use the same death notification tactic that Tina and Jim experienced. That webinar was run by Lexipol co-founder Bruce Praet. So next on my reporting to-do list was to interview Bruce about the consequences of his advice.
Brian sent emails, he tried calling him, he left phone messages, but Bruce never responded. Coming up, Brian tries to track down Bruce in person.
I told you I wasn't going to give a comment, and now you've got 10 minutes of my time. So I'm not going to miss my flight for your article or whatever. I got to find out where the hell I parked.
That's next on Reveal. From the Center for Investigative Reporting and PRX, this is Reveal. I'm Al Letson.
Short notice, but we wanted to make it work.
Jonathan Ryan Hernandez ran for a city council seat in Santa Ana, California, when he was in his 20s.
So when I ran against a sheriff at 27, I was seen as a kid, seen as somebody who wasn't necessarily a challenge.
He won his election in 2020, and after he took office, he started looking closer at the Santa Ana Police Department and its policies.
I thought, well, clearly, there are concerns here. And these concerns turn into lawsuits, and those lawsuits affect taxpayers. And so when I started following who is training these police departments, what policy manuals they're following, that's when I discovered Lexipol.
Lexipol offers training and policies for more than 95% of California police departments. Today, the company is headquartered in Frisco, Texas, but it was founded in Southern California, just a few miles away from Santa Ana. Jonathan finds out his city has had a contract with Lexipol for nearly a decade. He starts asking around about the company and hears a lot of good things.
It's a simple, easy platform to use, covers all of your bases, and it's cost effective. And police departments all over the state of California are using it.
But months later, Jonathan would be leading an effort to get Lexipol out of his city. Our reporting partner this week, Brian Howie, met Jonathan to find out why.
Jonathan's fight against Lexipol isn't just political, it's also personal. On a tour of Santa Ana, Jonathan takes me to a beauty salon on Santa Ana Boulevard. And painted on the side is a 10-foot mural of Brandon Lopez. Brandon was Jonathan's cousin.
Brandon Lopez was a Santanero. He loved Santa Ana. He was a father. He loved music. He loved tattooing. He loved graffiti art. When we were kids, he was a really amazing skateboarder. He's somebody who went through the struggle like us. And sometimes those who go through the struggle, we don't always make it out.
Less than a year after Jonathan took office, Brandon was shot and killed in a standoff with Santa Ana and Anaheim police. The mural is painted a few yards from where he was killed.
Right there, they murdered him, literally right there, 22 bullets. It was a 4-hour standoff, and I was at each of the precincts trying to save his life.
Brandon was unarmed, and Jonathan thinks the department could have de-escalated instead of shooting him. Later that night, Jonathan got a call to come to the scene. He and a family member were greeted by an officer.
And they didn't confirm right away if Brandon was dead. But they did ask questions about Brandon. They asked about his past. It became very clear the night of the murder that they wanted to begin their investigation then and there, before ever telling us that he was deceased.
This lines up with what I found across California. Investigators questioning families before sharing the news that police killed their relative. It's the same tactic one of Lexipol's co-founders suggested to police officers in an online training. This practice was part of what Jonathan came to see as Lexipol's bottom line, helping police departments lower their chances of getting sued. So he set out to push Lexipol out of Santa Ana.
So item number 20, please. This was pulled by...
That would be me?
Councilman Hernandez, yes.
Madam Mayor?
Yes,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Thank you.
In September 2023, Lexipol's contract was up for renewal, and Jonathan tried to block it.
I do believe that Lexipol has advertised its policies primarily to protect law enforcement from accountability.
On the city council floor, Jonathan argued the city should write its own policing manual with community input instead of getting it from Lexipol.
I believe that for us to be able to do this in-house is going to create a sense of trust that we simply don't have.
Some city council members agreed with Jonathan. Others weren't swayed.
I trust our police chief, I trust our city management to be able to do these things and vet them through the police commission, through the city council.
But when it came down to a vote,
the vote is 4 ayes, 3 nays. Nays by council members Hernandez, Vasquez, and Mayor Pro Tem Lopez.
The motion failed. The contract with Lexipol was renewed for another 3 years. I got a hold of Jonathan by phone after the vote was cast. He was disappointed, but he's already planning his next move.
So I think what happens next is having a magnifying glass on Lexipol. We still have the ability to look at the contract and see, what policies are being adopted.
In the meantime, Jonathan is pushing for an alternative to Lexipol. But convincing his fellow council members could be a hard sell, in part because Lexipol is so convenient for cities and police agencies. I spoke to several California police chiefs whose departments contract with Lexipol. Many told me the company is a valuable and necessary resource for their day-to-day operations. Take, for example, the Fremont Police Department. It's contracted with Lexipol for more than a decade. I interviewed Matthew Snelson, who is now a captain in the department.
They give us timely updates on when law is being changed, recommendations and best practice as they see it, what their attorneys think.
When I spoke with Matthew, part of his job was vetting policy updates for the department. Police departments in smaller and mid-sized cities often rely on Lexipol to help them keep up to date on the latest local, state, and federal laws.
We're really using Lexipol to be a content provider, to be an alert source to say, hey, there's changes that you should be aware of. Here's our recommendations on how to change that language, things like that.
Matthew and other heads of police departments tell me Lexipol's policies have been legally sound.
As a public agency, we're sued at times over the years, and I'm not aware of a time where one of our policies was shown to be lacking or, not reflective of law, best practice.
Okay, so Lexipol makes life easier for some police departments. But did they know about the company's co-founder, Bruce Praet, and the advice he was giving? Like his take on death notifications. I played parts of Bruce's online trainings for the police chiefs I spoke to. They had a range of reactions. Some said Bruce's advice would never fly at their departments. Others said his advice was legal, albeit a little crass, and brushed it off. Matthew didn't want to talk about it.
I'm going to stop you, Brian. I have no comment on any of this. It has no bearing on our contract with Lexipol or how we interact with Lexipol.
Okay. These are on the Lexipol websites, though. I mean, these are comments from the co-founder of the company, and
sounds like opinion pieces.
Okay. I mean, does the opinions?
Do you have another line of questioning, or is this where you want to go from here?
These are the questions that I have about these webinars.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate your time.
You don't want to hear the rest of what I found?
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate your time.
I've spoken with more than a dozen family members of people killed by police who went through a delayed death notification process. Many of them told me they felt betrayed. Many also felt that the little chance at justice they had, their civil lawsuit against the police, had been undermined. Families and their attorneys believed departments offered less money to settle their lawsuits, in part because of the information they gave investigators. In other words, these police agencies had argued their relatives' lives were worth less because of what they said during the death notification. Bruce Praet might not have invented the tactic, but he advised officers to use it, and he did so from Lexipol's very powerful platform. I tried to interview Bruce. I called him, left him messages, I sent emails. He never responded. So I tried one last time to get his side of the story in person. In June 2022, I heard he was giving a talk in a suburb of Fresno, California.
All right, people are starting to come out now. I'm going to stand up and walk over.
Turns out Fresno is pretty hot in the summer. I sweat outside of the City Hall building where the talk is being held. After about 20 minutes, I see a bunch of guys with buzz cuts and suit jackets file out of the presentation. Then I hear that unmistakable voice coming from the auditorium.
Hey, Mr. Praet. Yes, sir. How you doing? Good. My name's Brian Howie. I'm a journalist. I'm working on a story about how law enforcement agencies conduct next of kin notifications and police shootings and in-custody deaths. I know that you've given some advice to departments on how to do those, and I was wondering if you had a few minutes.
Actually, I don't have a few minutes. I got to catch a plane, and I'm not involved in the notification part. That's the coroner's office.
Right.
So I wouldn't really be the guy to talk to.
Gotcha.
About that.
Okay.
Bruce turns away from me and starts walking at a hurried pace toward a small parking lot.
Anyway. It's only going to take a couple of minutes. I just want to lay out.
I'm not inclined to give a statement anyway, so sorry.
Okay.
All right.
Mr. Praet, I've been working on this story for nearly a year now, and you're a big part of it. I'd really like to give you an opportunity to just see what I've got here, lay it all out for you, give you an opportunity to respond.
No, I'll decline.
Decline?
Yep.
Okay. Are you sure?
Right. Yep. I got to catch a plane.
Bruce walks off looking for his rental car, but I keep asking him questions, and he keeps stopping to answer them. After each answer, he spins around and takes off, and we walk around in circles in the parking lot for the rest of the interview.
So then why did you advise police departments to withhold this from the family?
I didn't say withhold anything.
You instructed them to say, hey, Mrs. Jones, we've had contact with your son, and allude to some sort of vague interaction with the police department, at which point in your training, you make it out.
Agencies to get whatever information they can up front without any bias or perspective or anything else. Okay? So if Mrs. Jones, whoever Mrs. Jones is, says this is what he was up to for the last 24 hours, hopefully that's the truth, which is what we should have. Okay? So that's what we want them to get as early and often as possible.
Okay.
Don't you think that's a good idea? To find out what the person was up to?
Don't the people who have lost their loved one deserve to know that that person is dead before they're asked questions, though?
Do you think that might taint their perspective on what they say the individual was up to for the first 24 hours?
Do you think it would?
I don't know. It's up to the person that's being interviewed. If they want to share what was going on with the law enforcement officer, then they should tell the truth, shouldn't they?
So do you think it's okay then for law enforcement officers to withhold the next of kin notification?
You're the one who's saying withhold, not me. Don't quote me as saying that I've ever said withhold information. Do I advocate getting out there as early as possible and getting information, the truth, from family, friends, associates, coworkers? Absolutely. Get it all while it's still fresh, while it's still truthful.
Okay, but the way that you framed it in this webinar certainly seemed...
That's the way that you're interpreting whatever I said. I can't tell you what I said, okay?
Okay, but...
Now, I'm not going to do an interview or whatever. You got more interview than I ever intended for you to get. And I'm sure you'll put whatever spin you want on it. Whatever I say, you'll cut and paste whatever you want to put. I just told you, if you want to quote something said, the role of the officer is to get to the truth. Public has a right to know what happened. We have a right to investigate what happened to get to the truth. That truth shouldn't be tainted in any direction, okay?
And it's okay to withhold the truth in order to get the truth?
You're saying withhold the truth. Think about it logically, okay? I know this is a foreign concept, but logic and common sense, okay? If you all of a sudden are a grieving family member, and don't most people jump to the defense of the person who had the encounter with law enforcement? Shouldn't the officer be able to get the untainted opinion and perspective and facts from the family or friends or relatives or whatever it was? Shouldn't they get that before this person is tainted and all of a sudden in a defensive mode? If somebody says, why did you have contact with my son? They're going to tell him, okay? I've never said, don't ever tell somebody that the person has been shot.
Okay, but saying we've had contact with your son is a far cry from saying we've shot your son.
Isn't it true they've had contact with the son? I told you I wasn't going to give a comment, and now you've got 10 minutes of my time. So I'm not going to miss my flight for your article or whatever. I got to find out where the hell I parked.
I still don't know if Bruce ever caught his flight. I tried to contact him once more before this story went to air, but I never heard back. I reached out to Lexipol for comment. In an email, a company spokesperson confirmed that Bruce is no longer on the company's board of directors and made a point to say he was not an employee. The company distanced itself from Bruce's advice about death notifications. In a statement, Lexipol said that it recognizes that parts of the 2019 webinar were, quote, insensitive and potentially hurtful. It went on to say, we apologize for any harm these statements may have caused. Lexipol says the webinars have been removed from its website and are not a reflection of the company's values. The statement also pledged to monitor the opinions expressed by webinar presenters going forward. I followed up to ask when Bruce left Lexipol and why, but the spokesperson never replied. Meanwhile, Lexipol continues to expand its footprint. The company now contracts with departments across the country in states like New York, Texas, Oklahoma, Minnesota, and Florida.
Since this story first aired, there's been a movement to change the way death notifications are done in California, in large part because of Jim Showman, the father we heard from earlier.
Just arrived in Sacramento. We're now walking near the Capitol. Still get the butterflies and a little anxiety.
Jim has been working with state lawmakers to craft a new bill. It would require officers give families the option to learn about what happened to their relative before answering any questions. And just a few weeks ago, the bill made it out of committee. It's now headed to the House floor for a vote.
It had a devastating effect on all of us, with the family members. And I guess the only thing we can do is do our best to affect change so it doesn't happen again.
Also, before we go, another update. Brian reported this story from the beginning with the investigative reporting program at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism. He worked with Reveal and the LA Times to tell it. And recently, his reporting was awarded a George Polk Award. It's considered one of the highest honors in journalism. Our lead producer for this week's show is Najib Amini. Jenny Casas edited the show. Editorial and reporting guidance from Wesley Lowry, David Barstow, and Christine Shivo. Special thanks to John Kotz. Nikki Frick is our fact checker. She had help this week from Kim Frieda. Victoria Baranetsky is our general counsel. Our production managers are the Wonder Twins, Stephen Rascone and Zulema Cobb. Score and sound design by the dynamic duo, Jay Breezy, Mr. Jim Briggs, and Fernando, my man, Yo Aruda. Our interim executive producers are Brett Myers and Taki Telenidis. Our theme music is by Camarado, Lightning. Support for Reveals provided by the Reva and David Logan Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Jonathan Logan Family Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Park Foundation, and the Hellman Foundation. Reveal is a co-production of the Center for Investigative Reporting and PRX. I'm Al Letson. And remember, there is always more to the story.
Want to start a career or discover a new one with little or no debt? Find your answer at one of Virginia's 23 community colleges. Learn more at findyouranswer.com.
From PRX.